Welcome to the Assistant Lab podcast, hosted by Victoria Racken and Arnell Martin.
This podcast is dedicated to the executive assistant profession, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
We've created this podcast for the outliers, the linchpins, the assistants who are serious about their careers. This is a podcast for those who are preparing for the future today.
This is a space for no-nonsense content, benchmarking and tracking industry and world trends, as well as interesting interviews with exceptionally inspirational people. The goal here is to stimulate new ways of thinking and being in this profession.
So, on with the show.
Welcome to this next episode of the Assistant Lab. I am interviewing the fabulous Leeanne Adu. Leanne's an award-winning executive assistant from the UK and actually now runs a really successful virtual assistant agency called Lava, or Lava. I absolutely adore this woman so much, personally, professionally. She has got a story to tell. And we first met actually when I was a judge on the National PA of the Year Awards in 2013, and she came bouncing into the room as one of the finalists, and you'll hear more about that in this session. I do have to put a trigger warning on this podcast though, because we do cover some what may be for some difficult areas. So we talk about mental health and having suicidal thoughts and how mental health has impacted Leeanne from a personal and professional perspective over the years. We also talk about traumatic pregnancies and a traumatic labour, and also touching upon her breast cancer journey, which she has been very open about on social media. And I also lightly touch upon anorexia and obesity, and that kind of leads into the body confidence movement. I think we've done it in a really uber positive way, but for some this may be a little bit difficult to listen to. There's no doubt about it. If you're anything like I was interviewing her, you may come away feeling just a tad emotional, inspired, and just thinking what an incredible, sensational woman Leeanne Adu is. So enjoy. I'm very excited to welcome the fabulous, amazing Leeanne Adu to the Assistant Lab. Welcome, and thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you for having me. You know I love all of our conversations always, so I'm so excited.
Yeah. And in fact, we can get into how we first met in a moment, but just to anybody listening, obviously I'm riding solo for the next couple of episodes because Anel was in the middle of a really super stressful move across South Africa, which is incidentally a huge country. She said it takes 3 days to drive from where she lives to where she's moving to, like 3 days worth of driving. And you think about the UK and us moving across country, unless you went up to the Highlands, I don't think you'd have 3 days, would you?
I'm on about an hour and a half drive to Hampshire, so yeah.
Yeah, so and now sending lots of love and hoping the move goes really well for you. But obviously we're here to talk about your life today, here, Lee. And I was thinking about you a lot yesterday when I was thinking about doing this interview with you today. And the very first time you walked into a room and I met you, and that was when I was on the judging panel for the Executive PA Magazine Awards, which was it 2013?
Yep, 2013 that was.
Yeah, and Katie McEwen was on the panel as well, and then I think there was a director from Hayes and some people from the magazine. And I remember Katie and I were sitting next to each other on the panel, and I remember you walking into that room that was overlooking the Thames, and Katie and I had our hands under the table, and Katie gave me this really, like, about 30 seconds after you started speaking, gave my hand a really tight squeeze. And knowing Katie as I did, I was like, she's excited and so am I. And you were just like, whoosh. It was like a breath of fresh air. I've judged a lot of awards over the last 20 years. And I think there was a few things about you. It was your personality, it was your confidence. We'd never had that many third sector PAs at that time, and still even now, come forward for awards. Yeah. And so there was just so many different elements to you, and you just brought your A game to that. It was just beyond ridiculous and amazing.
No, I'd never done a presentation before that day. I'd never
Really?
presented to anybody, not in a team
Tell me that.
meeting. That was the first time I'd ever presented, ever.
Oh my good, I'm gonna have to WhatsApp Katie later because we didn't know that. We did
Never
not know
done
that.
before.
So what, like, actually, let's just start with that. What made you go for the award, or who nominated, or was it a self-nomination?
It was a mixture. So I did self-nominate and a colleague nominated me. And at the time, I think I was feeling a little bit lost. I was working for a charity for charity CEOs. And I felt like I needed to understand how far I had come over the past couple of years, because it was my first chief executive, PA to chief executive role. I'd been bouncing around jobs. I was wanted to understand my own successes and if I had any. And the application form for that award was quite comprehensive, and it wanted to know where you thought you'd done well, all your experiences. So for me, filling in that application form, it wasn't because I thought I was going to win. It was because I needed to see for myself how well I'd done. And so I filled in the application form kind of based on that. So I could just see for myself, all right, this is what I've done. These are the projects I've worked on. This is the difference that I've made to the people I work for in their lives. So that was why I applied for the award. And then I casually threw around the office, if anyone wants to nominate me for this, here you go.
Love it.
And someone did. And that was how I got to that point where we were standing in that room.
How
And
did
to
you feel though? How
well,
did you feel like when you were told that you'd been shortlisted and you were in that final five, and then you had to come and give a presentation in front of the panel?
that was the moment that I felt I'd won, because I didn't think I was going to win. I couldn't imagine why I would win. So even getting to that, every step we went through, I was like, wow, I've actually done something here. I've actually got this far, and that's enough for me. If it doesn't go any further, I'm not going to get my hopes up, because I don't think it's going to be me. There were so many other accomplished PAs who were in that shortlist who had applied. So every single time I was like, that's fine. This is as far as we get, and I'm happy with that. Even on the day of the awards, I was convinced it wasn't going to be me. I thought it was going to be Dalia.
Do you know the funniest bit of it all, when we actually, because the awards were like 2 hours later, weren't they, and you were starting to make a beeline. I was chatting to Kate, and I think you were starting to come over to us, and Kate was like, I can't handle this, I can't keep a straight face, because obviously we knew you'd won, and she was like, I'm going to the toilet, and just sort of left me, and then I'm there faking, oh, well, congratulations again for getting this far. Do you remember that little chat? And it's really you just kind of, yeah, as a judge, and you get that excited about seeing one of your peers, you know, put themselves forward for an award in that way, and then bring their absolute A game. And it was a really strong category. Yeah, we had Darla, I think there was Ali Hare as well, and
There was a
couple of
few.
others.
Yeah,
And it was, yeah, to then have to keep a straight face until that is then announced on, and seeing your face and the reaction of the room as well. And because I think something else, and I hope you don't mind me bringing it up, which had nothing to do with how we judged it, but you were the first person of colour to win a national award, and I think that was a big thing. And I'm not sure if you kind of knew how big that was at the time.
no, not really. I also suspect I was probably one of the youngest winners as well, because what were we, 2013, 10 years ago, I was 28. And I've always think at the time you never realize the impact these things have until later on. So yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, and it's only when you look back you're like, wow.
I remember afterwards and running some of the Hayes PA events, like had people saying to me, like, it's because you had so many different facets to you, you know, being young, coming from the third sector, it was just like bang, 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 bang. And so it reached out such a big audience in the PA world that perhaps I could be there too. And that was something I was continually hearing across the UK when we were talking about you having won the award and stuff. So it felt really, really good that year.
Yeah.
And so it was amazing. So I want to, I mean, obviously when I see you, I always call you Special Lee, and I know you've done some press around this in the past. So I think it's time to go back through the story. Let's go back to 16-year-old Lee,
Yes.
and how you ended up with the nickname Special Lee. But what happened when you were 16? Did you go to college, uni? No?
Well, I went to college for about 3 months and started a childcare diploma. And I went to college because I didn't know what else I was going to do, and I had to do something. I was really, really shy as a child, as a teenager, into my adulthood. I didn't have a lot of confidence. I did have friends, but I didn't really feel like I fit in anywhere. And I just didn't really believe in myself. Very average student, could have been a lot better, didn't apply myself, blah, blah, blah. Went to college for a few months. Yeah, went to college for a few months. Didn't really enjoy it. I wanted to get a job, but I knew that my mum would not let me drop out of education completely. We knew I wasn't going to uni, and that was fine, but she wouldn't have really let me leave education fully. So I dropped out of college, enrolled in my sixth form, and then got a part-time job working as admin. And I've had some truly horrific admin jobs in my early years. Truly.
I hear you. I hear you. I found looked back at my career recently over Christmas when I was tidying up my education box, and it had, do you remember the old record of achievements that you
Yeah, I've still got mine. Still got mine. Got my personal statement in there, everything. Yeah.
To belly laugh.
All those certificates, 100% attendance.
Big work, yeah. And then you kind of come out into the working world, and like you had just touched upon, like some of the jobs I accepted when I was younger, and what happened in some of them, it's just.
And could you go to the job centre? You know, that was how you get jobs. You go to the job centre and see what they had, or you'd look in the local paper, and that was how I got job. My very first job was a receptionist in. No, my very first job was a greeter in Asda, and I loved it. It was amazing. And my whole theme throughout my whole career is masking. And, you know, when we're doing our jobs, nobody has to know who we really are. And to be honest, a lot of people don't care who you are outside of your job. And that's an asset when you're not feeling comfortable or you're feeling shy. So my first job was a greeter, and I'd be there and make all the announcements. My first admin job was as a receptionist in a gym, a little back alley gym that was full of dodgy guys, owned by a dodgy guy. Lots of stuff going on that a person of my age shouldn't have been privy to. I remember I got all my friends' jobs there as well, doing various different things. But it was terrible. Like, we wouldn't get paid on time. The guy was really bad. Like, he was drug addict, steroids, all that. Oh, horrible stuff. My second job after that was in a small home office as an admin assistant to a couple who were like estate agents. They rented out properties, and this was one of the properties that they owned. And they would go out in the day and they would lock the door. So I'd be locked in this office while they went out on viewings and things like that. And the woman didn't trust the man, and she would, one day, the door was locked and she couldn't get in. And I, like, my danger sensors did not go off for any of this stuff, like being locked in an office all day on my own, being locked in an office with a man that I don't really know. But she came in and she accused us of having an affair. And I was like, whoa, lady, I'm just here to do my job. And I didn't last very long there at all. And then my third job was as an admin receptionist at a mirror factory, a local mirror factory, and they kept going bust and changing their names. And when I look back at the sexual harassment in that office, I remember one of the directors used to call me Amazonian. You're so Amazonian, Leeanne. Another one called me an elegant gazelle. And it was just, you know, wrong. I was 17. By this point, I can't have been much older than 19. 19.
How did you feel? I mean, obviously things have changed a lot with diversity, but I mean, I've just read a book that's been written by Nazir Afzal on racism in the UK, and it's breathtaking. And this is from recent stuff that's been going on just in the last few years in the working world. How did it feel back then, though, to you, like hearing stuff? Did you take like the Giselle thing? I mean, Amazonian, it's just
as a fully grown adult, and I say that in inverted commas, looking back, I can see the racial connotations. I didn't see them at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't see it as sexual harassment. I didn't see it as kind of racially charged sexual harassment. I also come from a ridiculous place of privilege as a mixed race, fairly light-skinned Black woman. You know, to me, it didn't seem like obvious kind of racism. But now you don't call Black women Amazonian. You don't liking them to African animals. You don't do that. But at the time, being so young, being so naive, I didn't see it as compliments. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to challenge it. I didn't know how to, you know, what to do about it. I just kept my head down and kept going. And
Just parked it and
yeah. Looking back now, I would absolutely speak up. And there were other times in my careers where I've witnessed microaggressions against myself, against others, where I'd be 100% much more comfortable to speak up about it.
And I guess that's where society has started to change in a positive way. I'm not saying we haven't got a long way to go, because this book has told me we've still got a long way to go, but the fact that now we'd hope that people can challenge it, or at least some find the confidence to be able to challenge that it's not okay to say that stuff. It's just not.
It's not okay. It's never been okay. It never will be okay. But we have so many more resources out there. And also, it's not always for, it's the person experiencing the harassment shouldn't be the one to have to challenge it. Yeah. The people around them should be the allies, should be the ones who are like, this is wrong, because me challenging it or another person of color challenging it could put them in a situation of danger. Could put them in a position whereby they might lose their job. And we need other people who are ready to be allies, who are ready to do the work, who are ready to be actively anti-racist, to sit there and call out. We need our white colleagues to be the ones who go, no, we're not having this.
Yeah, and I think that's the fun. I mean, well, I've always said I've always had a big gob, and it's got me into trouble throughout my life in school and sticking up for friends. But yeah, I totally get that. One of the things one of our members, who's mixed race as well, said to me in the first part of COVID, when she felt racism was really starting to escalate, she said, I feel exhausted, Vic. I'm totally, I feel like I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I'm totally exhausted with it. Because she felt like she was in her company just firefighting it on her own. And yeah. It's a really good message to get out there to everybody listening, to be a better ally and don't just stand back.
Yeah, and I'd love it if when we put out this podcast episode, we could share the book that you read, the books like be it The Good Ally by Nova Reid, Why I'm No Longer Talking to Race, Why I'm No Longer Talking to Race People, Why I No Longer Talk to White People, some really great books that people can go and read, because it's not just about saying, well, I'm not racist. It's about doing the work to become anti-racist, actively anti-racist.
Yeah, and I think, do you know the thing that's always, I mean, obviously, I'm the daughter of a gay man, and we saw what Dad had to go through, and we got bullied at school for having a gay dad and stuff. I just, what I always don't get, and especially with the private sector in the UK, it's been proven having diversity in your workforce, on your leadership teams, makes a company more profitable. So even if you can't get your head around that people should be given equal opportunities no matter what your background, race, religion, if you are someone that is just profit obsessed, which some of my past bosses have been, surely just on that alone you'd create that change. But they just don't seem to have got there, have they? I mean, it's
ego, it's prejudice, it's not being able to see further than the end of their own noses.
Yeah, which sadly some leaders in the UK just, well, they shouldn't be in those positions. And I've talked about that before, and some of the leaders in my back catalogue, as I call it now, of people I've supported and given assistance to, there's no way, now being a bit older and having more experience and confidence, there's no way I'd support that sort of person now.
Yeah, you can spot the red flags a mile away.
Yeah, you can. It's trials and tribulations, though. So back to your career. So you were at the Mirror Company.
Oh, yeah. So I went to the Mirror Company. I was there for, I think, about 2 years before I decided to head to the big city and get my first city job, working for a reception role, working for a company who did like student magazines, and they were based in Aldgate, Aldgate East, so Whitechapel, so right on the cusp. I was like, I've made it. I remember my dad telling me, you've got to get a power suit. And I was like, yeah, I need to start dressing powerful now. And it wasn't all that.
I remember that as well. And I'll tell you something funny, Lee. When I got that first suit, my dad bought it for me, and I strayed into the city on the day of my first job, and I split the zip on the crotch area. So I walk into my job and my knickers are on show.
all these notions, like, we're going into the corporate world, guys. Here we go, power suits on.
It's so funny looking back at it now.
I was so young, so innocent, but that was a really great company to work for. Really lovely people. It was like a heavy sales environment. I was on reception and really enjoyed it, but I wanted to become a PA. That was the point where I was like, I want to be a PA. And I remember speaking to my line manager, can I apply for a PA job? And they were like, oh, we just don't think you've kind of got it. And I was like, oh, okay. And again, I was there, all my jobs, 2 years. And I was like, right, well, if you can't give it to me, if you can't train me up to be a PA, then I'm going to go elsewhere. And that's when I started looking for other PA jobs, or my first PA job. And I still didn't get it. I applied at Channel 4. I applied in loads of places. But then I got a job. My next job was as receptionist, because I was like, well, you can be a receptionist. And then HR assistant at an energy trading firm, one of the big ones. And that was a great job, really enjoyed it. They put me through my foundation course for CIPD and HR. So I had that there. I was on reception for like a matter of months before I moved into the HR department properly, as a HR sort of administrator. But it's something I've talked about a lot. I was suffering from depression at the time, didn't know it. I was having suicidal thoughts, didn't really understand why. You know, we know how depression works. We know how depressive episode works. I just remember that I needed to get help because I was having suicidal ideologies. So I went through the employee assistance program, started counselling and things like that. And that really helped. But I wasn't doing my job. And this is something that I've talked about a lot. And you've heard me talk about like this drawer. We have this drawer of doom. I've got one here. It's full of rubbish. But it's that drawer. Physically, it's a drawer where we put the things and we say we're going to come back to them later. And we never do. Mm-hmm. Mentally, it's a drawer where we put the things that our brain is too crowded to think about, and we say, I'll deal with that later. I'll deal with my anxiety later. I'll deal with my depression later. I'll deal with my intrusive thoughts later. And you never do, because they're in this drawer and you can't see them. And you just let them build up, and this drawer gets full up, more full up, more full up. So I went on holiday to New York with my best friend, and we had a great time. And I got back, and the day I went back to work, we came to an agreement that I would leave, because whilst I was on this holiday, someone had opened the drawer. Someone had opened the drawer with all the things, and what had happened was a really serious thing that had happened. I was 23 at the time, and possibly even a bit younger. And I had, one of my key parts of my job was to do the employee background checks, whereby they would fill in the form, it would get sent off, and they'd have their background checked. And I didn't do this for a particular employee who, when I was on holiday, they were sentenced to prison for fraud. And so they didn't turn up to work one day. And of course, you don't turn up for work, people are going to look for you. And it was at this point they discovered this person was not who they said they were, had been jailed for fraud. Well, why didn't we pick that up? What happened in the employee check? Leeanne hadn't sent it off because Leeanne was too depressed, overwhelmed, scared. They recognised that because they knew how I was struggling. So they didn't fire me. We came to an agreement that I'd leave with a tidy sum of money, so that I wouldn't sue them, because I was in my early 20s and severely depressed, and they have a duty of care, which they hadn't kind of affected or done. They gave me a lot of support. They didn't just say, you've got to go. They gave me a load of support, and that then left me in a position where I was able to pay my rent for a few months. I was able to get myself in a better place mentally. I was like, look, you said You wanted to be a PA, so come on, let's go, let's do this. And also they gave me a reference, you know, any job that I'd gone for, I didn't have to say I'd been fired, you know, all of that stuff. It was a really sweet deal considering what had happened. And so then I started temping, and I temped and I pitched myself as a PA. So my temp roles were all as PA. And my first proper PA role was as PA to the HR director at the Arts Council England. And I was supporting a team of about 6 other HR people. So because I had that HR background, oh yeah, she can go and work in HR. And that was a 2-month PA role that turned into 2 years. And it was a complete baptism of fire. I'd never done train tickets. I'd never done all of this stuff. I had the HR stuff. I had the admin stuff, but it was like purchase orders, going through booking forms, all these meetings. I'd never done any of that. And I somehow was like, okay, this just works. I can do it. 2 years I stayed there, and it was amazing. I learned so much, so much, really enjoyed it. Baptism of fire, because you don't just go from being an admin assistant to supporting a team of like 7, 8 people, including the director. It was a lot. An executive director, she was on the exec board. It was a lot. Stayed there 2 years, learnt loads, and then headed off to the British Library, where again, PA to the HR director, completely different personality. Definitely got told good luck when I started that role, because I knew the HR director. Definitely cried a lot, sat at my desk crying. She was a tiny, very powerful woman, didn't take no BS, but equally didn't always listen and wasn't always the most level-headed of people. So she was a tricky character to work for. The team was an interesting team. And it was there that I kind of started to realize the power that I was having as a PA, because there was so many PAs in that organization, and frequently I was being told that I was the best PA. And I worked hard, and I stopped with the draw of doom at that point. I stopped being a person that would allow physical work to build up in a way that was going to get me in trouble. I couldn't afford to be in that situation again. It's never going to happen again. So I did my job, but I always felt like I wasn't really giving it 100%. So if I'm here just doing my job and you're saying that I'm the best in the library, what are these other PAs doing? I couldn't understand it. I was doing it, and I was doing it well, and I was working hard, but I wasn't giving 100%, not at all. So I really didn't understand why they were saying that I was the best, but we're going to run with it. And then you see like, oh God, so-and-so's been here 20 years, and they really are literally just turning up and answering the phone every now and then. And I guess something about perhaps my age and my kind of hunger to progress. Had a really amazing colleague, Caroline, who's like one of my best friends. She lives over there. You can't see, but she lives like literally our gardens back onto each other now. And when I was job hunting again and wasn't getting anywhere, she would be telling me, look, you need to really drill down what it is you want to do, who you want to work for. Will you take a pay cut? And with that in mind, I applied for the role to PA to the chief executive of Akivo, which is where I won my award and where I decided to enter. And it was because, again, I got so specific. I was happy to take a pay cut, but I was going to be working for a chief executive, and I was going to be working in the charity sector.
You and I are so similar in terms of some of the decisions we made. Like this is going to sound really ironic now. Like I was EA to the CEO in a charity, in the disability, like inclusivity world, and when I went to corporate, I took a 3K pay drop and lost a week of annual leave, and there was actually benefits to the charity. When I went into PLC, there was hardly anything. Like it was such a massive, but I knew I had to make this move.
Yeah.
Not like the charity sector was really well paid back then, but it was ironic when I took a pay cut to go from charity to a corporate PLC worth billions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it felt like I had to make that move at that time, and it was going to pay off, and it did pay off for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone knows, but yeah, it's sometimes you do have to do a bit of, I call it like moving and shaking to get to ultimately where you want to be.
Yeah. And that was that, and it was a great job. And I walked in, and the person before me had a draw of doom. I remember my induction. The guy turned up, hungover, if not still drunk. was very much checked out because he'd been sold the role. The organisation was quite political. You know, they were. You'll remember the charity CEO pay scandal of
Yeah.
2011, 2012. That my organisation that I was working for were at the forefront of that and were defending charity CEO pay, as they should, in most cases. No. So yeah, there was a lot of political stuff, a lot of lobbying, and this person had been, this poor boy, had been told that he would be doing a lot more of the lobbying stuff and less of the PA to the chief exec stuff, and he just hated it, and he
It's not
just
for everyone, is it? Yeah.
opening up that drawer of doom, all the things that he had not done, and being like, "We've got a lot of work to do here," and that became a huge lesson in managing the reputation of a chief executive who was already a bit of a wild card. He had a reputation. You'd find him in Third Sector magazine. They'd be talking about him. You know, he was in there constantly. He was a bit eccentric, maybe. And there was lots that happened there. So many lessons. He'd bring his dog into the office. Sparkle, as the dog was called, would have to sit with me. I'd have to take it for walks if he was in a meeting. I remember sitting outside Millbank while he went in and did an interview. It was raining. I sat by the river. Sparkle sat on my lap crying.
Sparkles.
Sparkle was, yes, and being like, is this my life? Is this what I signed up for? But then it got me in proximity to big names. It got me, you know, saying that I worked at Akivo got me through doors. It was a brilliant place to work with. It was also a place where I witnessed microaggressions and experienced microaggressions against myself. I experienced bullying there, which, to look at it, you know, you've seen me, Vic. I'm not a small person. I'm 6 foot tall. I'm not tiny. But there was a clash between me and another team member there. She just didn't like me. I don't know why she didn't like me. And I remember one time I was like, right, we've got to have a conversation about this. So we went into an office and she just started screaming at me. And I still don't know why. No idea what I did to her. And I remember I stood up and I said, sit down. And I slammed my hands on the table because I'd had enough of it. And then she accused me of intimidating her and bullying her and everything. And it was just the worst. And there was we were a tiny organisation, but there was like 3 of them who didn't like me, 2 or 3 of them who like kind of ganged together, and they just wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't look at me. And it was just like, what is going on? What is going on?
That's happened to me. You really, really feel it in a small organisation. It's palpable. It really is.
It really is. Couldn't understand it. Will never understand it. Moved on from it. Learned a lot about conflict resolution. Learned a lot about how to deal with difficult people. But that was where I applied for PA of the Year. Oh, and alongside that, I was a special constable, which is where it comes from.
Yeah. So tell us, how did you end up becoming a special constable? Because there was a big recruitment drive around then, wasn't there?
Yeah. So this, when I left the energy trading firm, and I had some time on my hands, and I remember my mum for ages, she was like, you should join, you should become a PCSO. I was like, no, mum. But I remember I needed to do something because I was in such a yucky place. And so I'd applied to become a special constable and went through all the training. It was amazing. It was such a confidence booster. It's also, again, this lesson in nobody has to know how scared you're feeling, because when you go out onto the streets and people are looking to you to help them, looking to you to have authority, to tell them what to do in difficult situations, you can't be like, oh, what am I going to do? You have to be strong. You have to be authoritative. You don't have to be horrible, but you have to command power. And so putting on that uniform really, really kind of helped me mask any fears and any insecurities, because I'm a police officer now and I might be a volunteer, but my duties are to protect people, or to look after people, and catch criminals. So that was where Special E comes from. It was amazing. I think I did it for like nearly 4 years. I became a special sergeant. I was youngest acting special sergeant on my borough. First female special sergeant on my borough. we did a team building exercise where I had to tell all these people again, because what happens is people don't like young people doing well. People don't like young people putting their best foot forward and having confidence and saying, this is what I want from life. So when I was in a position of power against people who were much older than me, who weren't as committed as me, who I then had to say, look, you can't do this, or this is how we need to do it, they didn't like me. And I remember we did this exercise where we were under 6 foot of water. So it was, almost above my head. And it was pitch black and we had to fix these holes. And I remember one of the facilitators screaming at me, you need to tell them if they don't fix these effing holes, they're going to effing die. And me being like, oh, but then suddenly being like, no, we have to do it. And we came out after, and I remember in the debrief, the guy was saying to people, why weren't you listening to her? And none of them could say anything. They didn't know why they just didn't like me because I was young, I was black, and I was a woman telling them what to do. And he had such a go at them. He's like, you need to get over it. You need to get over yourselves. This is someone who could save your life if you don't listen to them. And you've just gone and just because you are prejudiced against this person, essentially, for whatever reason, you don't like her because of her age, because of her sex, because of her race, stops here. So that was a huge lesson again in kind of confidence and who cares what everyone else thinks, go and do you. That's an amazing role. That taught me a lot.
And just one thing I do remember around the time I first met you, and you showed me some fabulous photos of being part of the Notting Hill Carnival parade.
Oh yeah.
God, I haven't done Notting Hill Carnival for years now, but I always used to pop up with Dad.
Yeah.
And it is a fabulous carnival. I know it gets a bad rap in the press, but you've got to go and see for yourself and go and feel it, experience it. But how did you get involved with the parade? Because the outfits you were wearing and what you were doing, it's phenomenal.
Just my friends. I think around the age of 25, so kind of when I started moving into being a PA. If you think up until maybe 24, I was a completely different person. So when I got to 24, 25, I really started to, I guess, grow into my adulthood and who I actually am as a person. And I made a whole new bunch of friends, a whole amazing group of friends who are still my friends today. And they all did carnival, and they were like, I was like, oh, I've been to carnival. I've not really enjoyed it. You've got to come with a float. It's a whole different experience. So the first year or two, I did it in just with the t-shirt. You were part of the band, you're part of the float, but I wasn't in costume. And then I plucked up the courage to do costume. And it's like, you feel, you're wearing very little clothes, but you're fully dressed. You're fully dressed in these most amazing costumes. And it's like you're a superstar. You walk down the street and people want to take pictures with you. They think you're amazing. You're like, I've just turned up and put this on, I'm just dancing around. It was just absolutely best experiences of my life doing carnival. It's only because I've had a baby and I'm 3 stone heavier that I'm not in costume, and costumes are crazy expensive now as well. But potentially this year may see me on the road again wearing very little clothes.
I've got no problem with that at all. So after you won the award, I remember you and I, because we've discovered we were working up the road from each other, King's Cross, Euston area, and I started meeting up with you quite a bit, and you were planning your wedding to
yes.
And I think did you get married a year or 18 months after? Was it 2 years?
Got married in 2016, so yeah.
3 years after, but you were already starting to plan it. And
yeah, we got engaged early 2014, so the awards were October 2013. Yeah. I got engaged May 2014, so what's that, 6 months later, if that?
I just remember that we were talking about weddings and stuff, and you had an absolutely fabulous wedding, which I was at for the bulk of it. It was amazing, but on a freaky hot day in London. And I just remember coming to the church, and I think it was your mum was like, whoa, it's like the aircon had broke down. It was like but it was an amazing day. But life was starting to change a bit for you around then. So you're obviously getting married, and then you left Akivo, and then you were starting to get feelings about becoming self-employed, and you got pregnant as well with your beautiful daughter. Talk to us a little bit around that kind of period? Because there was so much change in your life, wasn't there? It was like the next step.
It was once I'd won PA of the Ward and PA of the Year, and we started doing all the talks and things, and I was starting to think about, all right, what does the future look like? I'm engaged now. I moved to a different charity, a wish granting charity, not Make-A-Wish, and my boss there was terrible. He didn't really like me going for the opportunities that came with winning the award. I found it quite difficult. I think I only stayed there a year, and then I went to a women's sporting charity. And that was I loved my job. It was really difficult, and there were a lot of finance elements. I felt like I was failing a lot, and I was planning the wedding and all of that kind of stuff. I was there for so if that was 2016, I think I joined there 2015 because I only did a year at Starlight. Got married, and I knew that I wanted to have a baby, and I knew that I wasn't happy. I was no longer happy in an office environment. It just wasn't for me. I was no longer happy working for bosses who seemed great on the surface, but underneath had issues and didn't treat their staff right. And I remember pregnancy was really, really difficult, really hard for me. I got pregnant in early 2017. For anyone who has been pregnant, you know that there's no such thing as a little bit pregnant. You literally wake up one day and your whole body is telling you something's happening. Alarms are going off, be it morning sickness, tiredness. My first signal that I was pregnant is that I had a headache, and I don't really get headaches, so I never used to get headaches. But this is weird. I knew I was pregnant a week before I even missed a period. And I was very active, as you know, ran marathons, did a lot of running. I lost a lot of weight in the run up to the wedding. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get to the end of my road without being sick. I couldn't do anything but eat potatoes for 3 months. I felt a lot of pressure to tell my boss that I was pregnant because I was so sick so early on. Not quite hyperemesis, which is that where you'd be hospitalized, but probably if I had looked at it, it was like, quite mild version of that. But severe morning sickness. Then I couldn't walk very well because my pelvis softened and I was in a lot of pain. So I was waddling from 4 months along. And it battered me. I got signed off work with anxiety during my pregnancy. I was too scared to tell my boss that I'd been signed off with anxiety. So we made up another pregnancy related reason. She wasn't happy about that. Someone decided to tell me that she had thrown a bit of a tantrum about me being signed off work. What was she going to do now? There was a barrage of temps that came in. It was awful. It was really, really awful. I can't lie. I didn't enjoy pregnancy. I was very stressed. I was very anxious. All the coping mechanisms I'd put in place to manage my anxiety and depression failed me. It was a completely different scenario. I finished work as soon as I could. Finished work when I was about 7, not quite 8 months pregnant. Yeah, it must have been 7 and as early as I could on maternity leave. And then gave birth 2 weeks later after I got preeclampsia, and I was in hospital for a week. And yeah, they had to do an emergency cesarean section. I could tell you all about the birth story if you want. They sent my uterus to my bladder, which wasn't fun. The anaesthetic wore off. Trigger warning. Please put trigger warnings on.
Yeah, I'll put a trigger warning on.
Because we haven't even got to the cancer yet. The anaesthetic wore off. I could feel my legs during the surgery. And afterwards, I was just a broken human being. Absolutely broken. I was really depressed.
I'm sorry about that horrendous noise in the background. It's my dog cleaning himself. You know what he's like. You can't stop him, kids.
I can't even hear him, bless.
Oh, honestly.
Yeah, I was super depressed. I was being managed by South London and Maudsley, which is Lewisham's mental health services. I was seeing psychiatrists. I was on antidepressants. My health visitor would come to my house every week. I wasn't coping at all. I wasn't coping. It wasn't Tiana. Tiana was the one good thing, the one great thing, and I probably held on to her too tight, but I was catastrophizing, Vic. I'd walk out the house and be like, a plane is going to crash down on my head. I could almost hear the engine failure. A bus is going to drive into us. I'd stay in the house and it was just hell. I'd beg Chris not to leave. It was just the worst. But it led me to some groups such as Mindful Mums, which up until recently I've been a volunteer for, and things like that. It led me to some really amazing people who were able to support me. And that was kind of when I was like, I'm not going back to work. I'm not going back into those environments that push me to my edge. I couldn't even think about work. Even when I applied to volunteer for Mindful Mums, which was during my maternity leave, I cried on the way there because I'd left Tiana, and I literally went half an hour down the road. I cried.
This is what I love about you, and how brutally honest you are about it. I mean, obviously I'm childless, or child-free as we're now reframing it. But it doesn't matter whether you've had kids or not, or you're thinking about it in the future. There's still this gloss over pregnancy. I get so sick and tired of seeing this on social media. I'm seeing it on LinkedIn all the time now. Oh, look at me, I popped out a baby and I'm back at work the next day and breastfeeding, and they look great. Or these women that have snapped back into body wise, and I'm just like, this is not how it really is for your average
No.
person on the street type thing. I think it's really inspiring to women, because everybody reacts differently to pregnancy, and some women do sail through it and they're glowing, and they haven't been sick, or they've not had preeclampsia, but others don't, and it can, like you said, it can have a real effect afterwards.
Yeah, it really did. And I always said I wanted 2 or 3 kids if I could. And now I'm like, nope, that's enough. That's enough. So then I decided I couldn't go back to work. Rinsed out my maternity leave, got as much as possible from that, and then knew that realistically, as much as I did not want to go back into an office, bills needed to be paid. So at this point, now we're in summer 2018, I started to think about running my own business. And for years, since I won the award, people were like, you need to become a VA, you need to do it. I was like, no, I don't know how to run a business. I don't know how to do it. I was very much like, no, can't do it. But what were the options here? Completely changed career, and, no shade, like kind of go and work in a supermarket or a school, be a lunch lady, or do the thing that I love doing, but do it for myself on my own terms. So I then started to look into how I could make it into a business. What would I need to do? And I guess my only goals at that point were to be able to make the money that I needed to pay my bills. That's my only goal. Didn't care if I made a penny more. I need to be able to pay my bills. I did take a part-time job working in Westminster for an educational charity, and could do it with my eyes shut. It was like a 1960s secretarial role. My boss would come out of his office, hand me the dictaphone, I'd type up the letters, I'd hand it back, I'd make him tea, I'd do meetings. That was it. Switch off 3 days a week. And how fortunate that I could be able to go into a job part-time 3 days a week. Got to still spend time with Tiana, got to still heal, and got to build the business on the side. And the job was so piss easy that I literally, half the time I was working on client stuff, and really just building that business.
Well, I had to with EPAA as well, because EPAA started and then the Brexit referendum happened. I know we're all fed up with Brexit and blah, 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 but it had such a massive effect on EPAA, even though we don't trade internationally. And then we found ourselves totally broke. And so I thought, well, I don't want a high level PA role. I kept saying this to the recruiters. I don't want a big chunky role, because I still need to be able to manage the business. And so I literally took a really boring temp job for a publishing firm, sorting out all the subscriptions, doing like admin on subscriptions, things like that. So I totally get it. I don't know about you, but one of the worst bits of advice I was given on starting up a business was, you've got to devote every bit of your time, otherwise it's going to fail. But actually, what I wish I'd done when I started EPAA is already had a part-time job and had it that entire first year, rather than getting into the poverty line and then having to scrabble around. And it's something, when I've been interviewed about being a businesswoman, and the things I wish I could tell myself back even 6 years ago, that I hadn't listened to some of those business people, because they're good friends and their businesses are super successful right from the get-go, but not every business owner has that experience. Like, in fact, it takes time to build.
It does. And, I was still healing from so much. I was still on medication. You'll remember, I was still on medication. I was still really quite unwell. And my advice to myself probably would have been, don't do this yet. Don't do this, because a lot of it was out of panic and fear, and I must do this now. when actually I probably should have looked after myself a bit better at that point, and not, because I ended up then spiraling back into the depression, and not doing so great. That first 6 months, I made a lot of mistakes, and it was only in early 2019 that I started to get a bit more goal focused, a bit more understanding about how I wanted my business to run. And that's when it grew legs. And that's spring 2019. I went to a Lululemon weekend like festival, Sweat Life Festival, and there was a goal planning session. And during that goal planning session, sometimes you forget. We know how goal driven I am, but I'd kind of forgotten how important goals are. And at that weekend, I set some really strong goals for myself, and it's fought into action. The second I set those strong goals, the wheel started turning because I had focus. I wasn't just being like doing this on the side, doing this alongside my part-time job. I've got a commitment to the clients that I've got a commitment to the clients that I want to bring in. And that's when it all turned around. I think that was March 2019. And that's when everything, and then by summer, 30th of July, so literally a year after I incorporated, I handed in my notice at BDT. And by 3 months notice I had, what a slog. Did not move in that time, moved us offices, the chief executive left, an incoming chief executive came, got him settled in, and then I went, and I was just like, November 2019, fully self-employed person. That was scary. I said, I'll give myself until February. I'll give myself 3 months. I had about 3 months worth of money in the bank. And if it doesn't work out, I'll go back to an office job. But let's give it till Feb. And that December, I think I billed £400. I was like, shit. Okay, this is what they talk about when they say no one makes any money in December. Yeah, but it ran. And you know what happened in 2020.
Yeah, and the bottom fell out of a lot of our worlds. Also, we thought, because you actually managed to turn things around with the existing clients you already had and advise them on how they could keep their small businesses going, which I mean, you talked about it at our growth and confidence conference last year, and I like another PA I know, she's just recently lost her role, and
She's emailed me.
Has she? Yeah, I told her to go and re-listen to all those recordings. Because I think it'd be just again what she needs right now. But a lot of people sat there and were like, oh,
the panic, like, what do we do? The world has literally stopped. And for me, already being a virtual business, my world carried on. And we know a lot of businesses then looked at how they could take their offerings digital and virtual. And that's what we tried to do with my clients, the ones that I had who weren't, we're talking about yoga teachers who all of a sudden their studios have shut down, their classes have stopped. We looked at how we could make it online offerings, and we did it successfully. And I'm so proud of the work that we did in those early days where we sat there and we thought, we can't panic, we can't sit here and go, oh my God, I've just lost my entire income. We have to find new ways, and we're fortunate that we were able to do that. And I was fortunate that word of mouth has been my biggest, best type of advertising for Lava, but it brought me in newer clients, and we flew that year. It grew into more. I'd gone from 3 days a week to being full-time pretty quickly, and Chris lost his job at the beginning of the pandemic. It benefited our family in such a way that meant I was able to then fully put into Lava, and instead of me working those 3 days a week, I was able to work 5 days a week because Tiana was looked after, and she'd sit with me on calls, she'd jump up on my lap, and there would be times where I'd kind of like, no, I need some alone time to work. But for me, I think having her home as well, because she wasn't able to go into childcare, her childminder shut down for most of the summer. It was amazing. It was amazing.
But something obviously, and I will put a trigger warning on it, but something you've been so open about. You've undertaken media, you've been part of campaigns, but when did you get diagnosed with breast cancer?
So it's funny, the pandemic for a lot of people highlighted health issues and things going on in their lives. And I remember very early on in the pandemic, I started experiencing issues with my ears. I'd had an ear infection, and the doctor said it was lingering from that. And what would happen was ringing, like tinnitus, vertigo, constantly. I couldn't have any sound behind me. If someone was behind me, kind of rustling paper, it was like they were rustling into my brain. It was horrible. And I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't get seen. I couldn't get any help. I just had to kind of live with it, and I felt like I was going mad, and that really affected my business because I'd just cry. It was just awful. And the reason I say that is because I believe that I believe that was my body telling me something was wrong. I don't necessarily think I had an ear infection. I think my body was telling me something's happening and you need to be aware of what's going on in your body. Listen to your body. Might sound a bit woo. But then fast forward to October 2020, I woke up one morning, rolled over, gave myself a hug and a stretch, and felt my boobies and felt like a lump, a pea-sized lump under the side of my breast, just under my armpit. And I was like, oh, that's new. Because I'm already a person that I know when I'm ovulating, I know what side I'm ovulating on, my periods are bum, bum, bum. I know my body. I was like, that's new. Okay, what would I tell my friend? And I messaged my mum and I messaged my best friend. I've still got the messages. I was like, found a lump on my boob. And both of them were like, well, you go to the doctors. And I'm like, of course. And I left it a couple of days, but it kind of stayed in the back of my mind. So like 3 days later, I phoned the doctor, had a telephone call, because again, that's all you could do. And they were like, oh, come in, we'll take a look at it. I will never, ever underestimate how lucky I was that they said, we'll come in and have a look at it. Because I saw an amazing GP who was very much like, you're very young, I was 25, I was 35, very young, healthy. I was in great shape because, of course, during lockdown, we all went on these health things, didn't we? And I'd lost loads of weight.
I didn't love. I became a whale in lockdown. So.
I went on a health tip.
Well, they did say you'd come out of lockdown a chunk, a hunk, or a drunk, and a lot of Brits say they did two out the three.
Drunk. I was a hunk drunk, and I think if I hadn't lost that weight, I might not have felt the lump. But essentially, she sent me off. She was like, "I'm going to refer you anyway." Long story short, 6 weeks later, sat in the doctor's office on the 4th of December to be told that I had an aggressive stage 3 breast cancer, triple negative, fast growing. And the reason why I relate that back to my ear problems is because I said to the consultant, how long do you think it's been there? And he said about 9 months. And so if we trace that back, that's the start of the pandemic. That was March 2020.
Can I ask, if you don't mind answering, when you were on your way to get your results, how were you feeling then? What was going through your mind?
So for me, when I went for my initial tests and they gave me an ultrasound and she decided to do a biopsy, and I said to her, she said, the right one's clear. We're not worried about the right one. I said, we're not worried about the left one either, are we? And she went a bit silent. And at that point for me, I was like, this is something. This is not just a lump, a cyst, a fibroid adenoma. She thinks this is something. And it was at that particular point, I told myself that I had breast cancer, probably not very healthy. And anyone going through this, I wouldn't want you to think just because you've had a biopsy, you're going to have breast cancer. That's not the case. But in my mind, I was like, well, this is something, because you don't give 35-year-olds biopsies, mammograms and ultrasounds for nothing. And it was a really long wait. And I got so much love from my clients at the time. They all knew what was going on because it affected me so deeply. I remember crying on so many phone calls. I didn't tell all my clients, but quite a lot of them knew. And on that day I went for my results, my best friend came with me. And a few days before, I had to really chase for my results. It shouldn't have taken 6 weeks. But I remember when I finally spoke to someone and she was like, right, we're going to book you in for Friday. I said, do I need to bring someone? She said, that might be best. And I was like, boom, that's it. Because we're in the middle of the pandemic. No one's allowed to take anyone anywhere. And when she said that, I was like,
Definitely.
and that's how we know. So I knew going in there. You've always got this tiny hope, but I knew. And we got in there, and Charlene held my hand, and she was my rock. She was I took her because love my husband. He is not my emotional person. She is her and my mum are my people when I need that emotional support. And we sat there and we just held hands, and and he said it. But what he said was, it's small, it's treatable. It wasn't that small. It's treatable. We're going for cure. And I was like, okay. I still thought I was going to die. I still think I'm going to die. We're all going to die. But he said, we're going for cure. I was like, okay, great. What are the options? He's like, we're going to give you chemotherapy. We're going to give you surgery. We think that we can take it out without taking your boob. And we're going to give you some radiotherapy. And the funny thing is, we say we're going for cure, but you never truly know if it's cured.
Yeah.
So I went through all of that, lost all my hair, started treatment on the 30th of December 2020. Lost all my hair. It was the worst thing. I was so miserable. Some people really, like anything, they will sail through. They won't get that many effects. But I think the mental does play a lot. And I was very, very miserable. And a lot of people wouldn't know it because they'd see the post. But I hated every second. Had to have a PICC line, which goes into your heart through your arm and like into your chest and stuff, so you can get the drugs in. I put on 3 stone. I had to have 2 blood transfusions. I remember it was Easter, and I just remember feeling so faint and dizzy and couldn't understand why. And then the next day I got a phone call being like, you've got to come in for a blood transfusion, because they're constantly taking blood from you, constantly. It's a full-time job. I took Wednesdays off work to have chemo, and those were the only days that I took off, really, apart from surgery. I think I took off maybe 2 other days where I didn't feel great. I was so keen not to let my clients down and not to let it affect my business that was growing, that at this point I had a PA and all sorts. And all my clients were so graceful and so understanding. And I think I got through it with like minimal mistakes. And when I needed, I worked from my bed. I've got an amazing table that I just would put my laptop on and work from my bed. And I took Wednesdays off. And I managed the kind of cycle, because when you have chemo, you have your chemo, then they put you on steroids that get you through the next 3 days. So you've kind of got like this buzz. Then I had the weekend where I'd start to flag. Then Monday I'd be feeling pretty crap. Tuesday I'd start to feel a bit better again. And then you'd go into chemo again the next week, because I was having chemo weekly for the first 12 weeks. Then I had chemo fortnightly for another 8 weeks. But you're just like, I've just got to keep going. I've just got to keep going. And I felt terrible. I felt useless. I was miserable. I couldn't play with Tiana. All I wanted to do was sleep. And I don't know how I kept going.
I remember when you put it on social media and that you were, experiencing this, and you didn't do it initially, have that kind of privacy. And I remember the EPAA board, which you used to be on, one of the board emailed the rest, and everybody was just like on the floor. Like there was like, oh my goodness, like seriously. And I remember Katie was just like, I can't, she was like, I'm just too upset to even talk about it, because she'd been through this with Jacqueline. It was quite a recent thing. And yeah, we were just kind of, I get emotional thinking about it now.
Yeah.
And then I was seeing your posts as time was going on, and what I did love that you did share the warts and all, and the times you were feeling tired and no hair and things like that, and then how you were, when you were starting to feel a little bit better, how you were coming out doing press and been such an inspiration to other women, being part of these high profile campaigns and
getting my boobs out, getting my butt out,
it was just like, wow, this is Lee kicking backsides, and it is inspirational to other women. It's a massive thing, especially in the UK and the statistics and stuff. And I realized as I was tracking, and sometimes I'm like a silent stalker in a good way, but I was, following everything along on Insta and Facebook. And I remember saying to my sisters on a Facebook Messenger group we've got just for us, and I was like, look, one of my friends has got breast cancer. This is like, and it's, it's not the first, you were not the first friend who's had cancer, but it was just the way you were talking about it. And I said, we need to talk about this now, because most of our family has had cancer at some point, especially my dad's side. And because we were told our dad had terminal cancer when we were very young kids, we realised we had some trauma around that. So anything around cancer, we were like, no. And I remember one of my sisters said when we were teenagers, well, we're going to all die of cancer eventually anyway, because it's in our genetics. And so we just put it in a box. Anytime someone mentioned the C word, we're like, nope, don't want to hear it. And I remember saying, look, girls, we need to have a chat about this, because we are getting older now, and your mums, and, you know, we're all, two of us are married, and life's getting, I just want us to start being a little bit more open about it. And I felt that obviously healthy people do get cancer. It happens all the time, but I felt that every one of us had things that probably weren't going to help the situation, and given the genetic background. And so we've been a lot more, because of you, we've been a lot more open about it as sisters now. Like we don't look at it with the same trauma that we used to, because of the things we saw in our childhood. And then when I found I had, you know, I suffer really bad insomnia, and one night I'm with Rossi watching some dodgy movie at 2 a.m, and I had an itchy breast. And I felt something, and I then did the kind of thing. I remember what you were saying, and then I looked at Copperfield and stuff. So this is like 2 a.m. I just lay down and I'm like touching my breasts, and I was like, I don't like the feel of that. And I phoned up my GP. This was December 2021. Phoned up my GP and said, I'm you know, a bit worried. And they were like, come down like in the next few hours. And I did, and it, you know, it was nothing to worry about. But it's kind of the impact you've had with some of those posts, which sometimes you're not really aware of, but it made me go, and I'm doing the regular checks now. And
I mean, I think the thing is, in my darkest days, I wished that I'd never found my lump. In my darkest days of treatment, I wished that I hadn't found my lump, and that would have meant that I probably wouldn't be here now. But in those days, I was like, I just wish I'd stayed ignorant to it, because this is so hard and I don't want to do it, and I'm so angry. And that's not me saying that I wished I was dying. That was me saying I wished I didn't have to go through this, because you could walk out the house tomorrow and get hit by a bus, and you live in this ignorance that, you know, today, 2 hours could be your last, and then you get cancer, and that ignorance can no longer exist. The fact that you are gonna die, possibly from this, possibly, is right there in front of your face. If treatment had failed, you know, and I went to stage 4, and even now, I'm, you know, I finished my treatment. There was no evidence of disease. Amazing. But that doesn't mean that there are no cancer cells in my body, or that the cancer is not going to come back, or that even now, a year and a half out of treatment, there's not cancer traveling around my whole bones that I don't know. I don't know. But you cannot live in that state of fear. And the one thing that I do know is that by understanding our bodies and knowing our bodies and knowing when something is off, means, you know, it's like your bank account. It could be so hard to look at your bank account because you know you've had a heavy weekend, but the second you've got that knowledge, you can deal with it. You might not deal with it very well, but once you know, then there are options. So checking your body, knowing what's normal, knowing what's not, gives you options. Not checking it doesn't give you those options. Not checking it is like walking out the house and getting hit by a bus.
Yeah. And that's why I think that strap line, which I've sort of adopted recently, your health is your wealth. It's like, seriously, I've so imprinted that in my head over the last couple of months. When I got really sick with COVID back in November, again, it's that vulnerability of oh, well, I thought, you know, that if I was going to get COVID, it'd be really mild, but it didn't. And Mark was disintegrating in front of my eyes, and I was getting quite worried. So again, it was like a proverbial kick. And then I was a massive fan, I think you were as well, of Deborah James, Bell Babe. And I loved her outlook on it. And I've got this here actually. I've just finished her book, and I'm passing it on to one of our members, which she wrote just before she passed. Oh, can't see it here. I've blurred my screen, but it's How to Live When You Could Be Dead.
Yeah.
And it's one of those books, it's labelled self-help, but it's such a proverbial kick to just get out there and live life. And I think, you know, I used to watch her posts, and I'm like, wow, this woman's terminal, and she's just going for every zest of life there is possible. And here I am sitting here with a bottle of wine, miserable. And
That's okay, Vic.
yeah, and it is okay, but it's kind of,
Okay. We
yeah,
should be aiming to live our best lives always. We should
yeah,
always be striving to be fit and healthy and strong. But life doesn't always go like that, and that's
no,
okay. And what we need
yeah,
to be doing is acknowledging how we're feeling right now in this moment and
yeah.
going, okay, so where do we go next?
Yeah, and I had a few private messages with Deborah actually on Twitter. I was part of a group trying to get her on Strictly Come Dancing. She desperately wanted to do that show before she went. It didn't happen, but yeah, I've always said to people, because I've suffered with mental health problems since I was a very young girl, and that's all been documented in the national press, but I've always said it's okay to do a little bit of wallowing. But I also know myself, like you probably do, when I'm wallowing too much and it's
Yeah,
affecting
yeah.
too many facets of my life. So it's a lovely book to read.
When it's time to try and get yourself out of the hole or get help to
Or
get out.
try, yeah. However you climb out of that black hole. And it's like you said, it changes as life goes on. Like the mechanisms I used as a teen when I was suicidal, to then in my 20s, to then in my 30s, and now I've hit 40 last. So it's different. It's really different for everyone and wherever you are in your life. So you started back running again,
Well,
Nisha?
I'm back in the gym. I think so. I finished treatment in September 2021,
Mm,
and it completely did a number on my body. And I guess I was in that hole. I was in that dark hole, and I wasn't really moving. I wasn't really exercising. I was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I didn't really know how to, because I was like so tired, so much fatigue. I've now got an underactive thyroid, which I think is the result of the radiotherapy. So
yeah.
I'm on medicine for life for that. And I just didn't really know how to kind of go about getting fit again. So I worked with a personal trainer who really helped me strengthen my arm and my shoulder where I'd had the surgery and kind of get that in shape. And now I'm working with a new trainer who's got me in the gym twice a week, swimming once a week. We've got accountability groups, there's check-ins. I am, nutritional stuff all round. And we only started at the end of December. I'm like half a stone down at the moment, which is exciting. I've got a long way to go, but I'm just feeling so much better because I am moving again, and I'm a mover. I'm a person who loves activity. I'm a person who loves to be active and exercising. So being back and doing all of that, but gently, and not pushing myself and not pushing a body that hasn't really exercised properly in 2.5 years, and that's been through loads of trauma. Just doing it in that way feels so good and joyful, and I'm enjoying it.
And I was really like, I actually squealed when I saw it on Instagram. You took part in a body confidence campaign. Was it for InStyle? Who was it for? The recent one?
So I did two for breast cancer awareness
Yeah.
back in October, and one was the Primark campaign, breast cancer
Yeah.
awareness campaign, which was, and when you look at these two pictures, they're pinned on my Instagram. So one was for Primark, and it was very soft, it was very muted, it was very gentle, and one was for Pretty Little Thing, which was the
That was
launch
it, Pretty
with
Little Thing. Yeah.
Girl versus Cancer, the charity Girl versus Cancer. And that one was all about, because what happens is you go through cancer, you go through trauma, and your body changes and you don't feel sexy anymore. So Lauren worked with Pretty Little Thing to bring together a post-surgery range that is going to help you feel like sexy again. And a lot of people are like, well, cancer is not sexy. This isn't about cancer. This is about women feeling good.
It was such a fabulous picture. It was, you all looked amazing.
And for me that day was so healing, because I did Primark a few weeks before Pretty Little Thing shot it, and Primark was shot on the hottest day of the year, those 40 degrees, hot studio, but also it was a day where I was having a bone scan because I was in so much pain. I went to my doctor, I was like, I'm sure the cancer's back, you need to scan me. And it was lovely, but I didn't feel sexy. I didn't feel empowered. I felt like I looked nice, but I can see how tired I am in those pictures because I've been in pain for months. Pretty Little Thing was me going, I forgot how sexy I am.
Yeah.
Forgot what a bad bitch I am. I forgot all of this stuff. And I put on these clothes and I was like, I am Beyonce. And I lost one of my best friends in the summer as well. And what that triggered me into doing is living my very best happy life. Losing Tracy is now, everything she said was about Leeanne. You got, you know, we were going through cancer treatment together for different cancers. She knew what was happening to her. I knew what was happening to her. And she was like, you need to grab, I know this is hard. I know you hate every second, but you're going to live. And so everything that Tracy wanted me to do, that's what I'm going to do.
And that you putting the pictures, lovely pictures of her up last year, and yeah, she sounded like an amazing woman. But I was so proud of you for doing that, because not just cancer, but the whole body confidence thing, full stop. Because I realised recently that I've spent the first part of my 30s anorexic and pretty ill. Then I have a little lull, and then we get into lockdown, and then I put on so much weight from the stress of trying to get through all the pandemic that I then am obese, and that's what I'm working through now. And one of the things I said last year is I actually find, and I know it's not popular opinion, and I'll probably get castrated for it, but I found a lot of the body confidence moving actually quite disturbing. It had quite an effect on my mental health, not in a good way. And so I started unpicking all these influencers I was following on Insta and TikTok and things like that, and then but seeing real women, and that what you did for Pretty Little Thing, it was such a striking picture. And yeah, there was a lovely piece, I think, of, you know, our bodies have been through this, but this is self-love and we're looking hot, and it was a hot picture. I
look at them, I look at those pictures and I'm just like, wow, was that me? I look at those pictures and I feel like she's a sexy woman. And, you know, I know people are looking at me and like, you've changed. You know Leeanne with the long curly hair, you know Leeanne who was very different to who I am now. And that's because I cannot afford to not step into my light. I'm going to have pink hair. I'm going to have ginger hair. It's staying short because I like my face. And I realized that I've hidden behind my hair for years. I hid behind my hair. Actually,
well,
I like my face.
You look absolutely stunning to me, but you always have. I mean, even when I first met you and stuff, but I've always found that about you. You've just, anytime there's been any sort of trauma in your life, you've just come back fighting, even when you've been in the deepest of dark black holes in terms of the mental health. I mean, it is just baby steps sometimes. Now, I know I've nicked loads of your time today, but I couldn't help it. Looking back, I mean, personally and professionally, we always tend to end the interviews asking our guests, like, is there any lessons learned, any advice you want to pass on, even in a professional or personal sense? Because you've been through so much, and the lucky thing for the rest of us is that you've been so open about it, and that's why you're so blooming inspiring. But is there anything you want to pass on, or any lessons you think you've learned?
Yeah, I think really believing in yourself, in your source, in your capabilities. If we look back to early Leeanne, I didn't believe in myself at all. I didn't believe what I could do. And now I'm here and I'm running I hate it. I'm running a 6-figure business. I hate saying that. I've got a team of 7. We're expanding constantly. We're growing. I didn't even think 5 years ago I could be that person. But as I started to believe in myself and understand the power that I have, it's made this journey so much fun. So the sooner you start believing in yourself, the better. The sooner you start understanding how awesome and amazing you are, the better. Always check your boobs. Always check your boobs. Once a month, pick a date, check your boobs. Check your breasts, check your armpits, check for things that are not lumps, check for things that are not normal to you. Because it's important. It's not like what they say is common. It's what's normal to you. What's your normal body like? And talk about your feelings and find someone that you can talk about and be honest. We spend our whole lives hiding how we really feel from so many people. You pick that person, pick your person and talk to them.
I love it. I love it. This has been such an amazing interview. I knew it would be, but it's just and I think we've actually done it at the right time, because January, well, it's not a grim month for me and you because we're birthday sisters.
Yes.
But for a lot of people, the start of the year is really, really difficult, isn't it, mentally? And the weather's really miserable in the UK at the moment. I mean, my village is underwater, and it's just lots of different things. And I just think it's, when people listen to this, it's just going to be a major motivation boost. You are an incredible woman, my special Lee. And thank you for being you and for sharing that with the world and just being raw and honest. I think that it's quite a quality to have now, especially with all the gloss that we see on social media. It's not real life, is it? So
No,
yeah,
it's not. Yeah.
Thanks for keeping it real.
Thank you we're talking about, God, 10, 11 years of support you've given me, and secret times before that where you didn't know me, but I knew you, and
people keep doing this to me. They've been constantly stalking me, and I don't. I think because I've had a lot of negativity with EPAA over the last few years, and it's really affected my mental health. And I've been open about that, and I've been interviewed for a national magazine recently about it. And it hasn't allowed me to do what I used to try and do every year, which was reflect on the good impacts I've had on people. And people don't always tell you. They're quick to moan, but they don't tell you, when you've done something right.
No.
So no, that's lovely to hear. But again, congratulations on everything you've achieved, and thank you so much for being with me today.
Always welcome.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Assistant Lab. If you enjoyed this content, you know what you need to do. Feel free to share it and help us grow our subscriber base.
Join us again next time, and until then, keep experimenting, innovating, and improving your skill set.